The escalation of China-U.S. confrontation is confirmed. Trump abandoned Ukraine, aiming to focus on China. The U.S. military is preventing the PLA from using force to invade Taiwan has become its top priority. Hello, friends. Today is March 31st, 2025. Monday. Welcome to this episode of Inside View of China. We can see that the Sino-U.S. game is deepening. Today, we will talk about the huge changes in the U.S. government's policy towards China. But this change is not one-sided. This change is mutual. The U.S. is changing. And China is changing. China is changing. So today, I will talk about the changes in the U.S., and tomorrow I will talk about China's changes. Today's talk is about this change combined with the leak of classified U.S. military documents. Tomorrow, I will talk about some leaked confidential documents the changes reflected. A few days ago, during the live broadcast, I once revealed to you some sensitive information I have been exposed to seems to be more than when I worked in the government. To be honest, this is not empty talk. Mainly due to the absolute trust of some old friends in Lao Do, of course. I will not betray this trust. The mission is glorious and a great responsibility. To be honest, I have indeed obtained through various channels a batch or even multiple batches of including the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Central Military Commission, which contain a lot of Sino-U.S. policy directions, strategic measures and other content. Some documents are mutually cross-referenced. Originally, for security reasons, didn't want to reveal the existence of these documents. But this matter is really of great significance. The international community's understanding of and logic is crucial, which is crucial for world security. So I can't publish the photos of these documents for now. I can't publish the full text of the documents' numbers and dates. But I can combine these documents to talk about macroscopically the CCP's current China-U.S. relations and China's political and military relations with Western countries, some important strategies for military relations. Here's about the future international situation, even some important messages for world security. So what I said is not groundless. Are all real top-secret documents within China? Which are top-secret documents? On the U.S. side, the New York Times leaked classified documents from the U.S. Department of Defense. As for Duan, will be the Chinese New York Times tomorrow. We'll also disclose some documents to you. Today, let's talk about the U.S. first. While the world is focusing on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the Western camp is divided. While European countries are doing their best to deal with Russia, recently the PLA's armed aggression against Taiwan, the risk is keep rising. It's almost on the verge of breaking out. To be honest, everyone knows that this is indeed a good opportunity. The U.S. is also highly nervous. We can see that U.S. Secretary of Defense Hegese is visiting Japan. He has repeatedly made tough remarks, and even once said that the U.S. is ready to fight against the CCP. All these speeches are all intended to form a strong deterrent to the CCP, forcing the CCP not to act recklessly. According to the Washington Post, Secretary of Defense Hegese recently signed an internal confidential guidance memo shows that the United States sees China as the so-called only threat at one pace, refers to the threat that needs to be dealt with closely, preventing the Chinese mainland from seizing Taiwan and strengthening the U.S. homeland defense as its top priority. Attention, priority. To do so, it is willing to reduce its military in Europe, the Middle East and other places, and be prepared to accept the risks. And is prepared for it. Meanwhile, it requires European allies to take on more defense responsibilities. The threat from Russia is mainly the responsibility of Europe. This means that the China-U.S. confrontation is escalating rapidly. The Trump administration publicly announced to abandon Ukraine, intending to focus on China, preventing the PLA from invading Taiwan by force, which has become their top priority. So does this mean that the U.S. military want to clarify the use of force? Today, we will focus on discussing this issue. The leak of this important document from the U.S. Department of Defense has undoubtedly sent a stronger signal. The U.S. military is preparing to fully respond to China's, especially in the context of preventing the mainland from attacking Taiwan by force. For such a move, does it mean that the China-U.S. confrontation is accelerating? Is the U.S. military's attitude towards Taiwan defense clearer? I think the answer is yes. Behind this reflects a highly offensive set of global strategic considerations. Let's take a look. The U.S. military document says the only step threat is the new strategic focus of the U.S. The only strategic threat of pace. Many people don't understand this term. This statement revealing America's high vigilance against China's rise as early as the end of Trump's first term, the U.S. Department of Defense proposed to shift the strategic focus to the Indo-Pacific region to deal with the so-called Chinese challenge. Now, in 2025, Trump is back in power, seems to go further. First, he wants to fully prevent the mainland from using force on Taiwan. Second, it will shift the security responsibilities in Europe, leave more to European and regional allies to bear. The Middle East is mainly handed over to Israel. Third, it will focus on to strengthen the U.S.'s domestic defense. This means that the U.S. is conducting a strategic retreat. The new U.S. administration believes that the security of the United States is facing unprecedented threats. In the 21st century, the traditional strategic thinking of keeping enemies out seems to be far from enough. In the past few years, the U.S. and Europe have invested heavily in the conflict. They not only used military equipment for assistance, but also provided huge diplomatic and economic support. However, during the election, Trump repeatedly criticized the U.S. for spending too much money in Europe, but ignored more threatening opponents. The internal memo exposed no equivalent to refining this criticism into an official strategy. The U.S. no longer sees dealing with Russia as the most urgent military deployment task globally, but to free up its hands to focus on the Indo-Pacific region, aiming at China. So here's a question to discuss. Is the United States going to give up on Ukraine? The issue of Trump's thought. If the U.S. is becoming indifferent to Ukraine and ask Europe to take on more defense responsibilities, this is just a superficial policy adjustment. The deeper meaning is that the Trump administration is unwilling to consuming U.S. military spending and military power, but rather focus on the Asia-Pacific region to contain China. Under this trade-off, the importance of Ukraine to the Trump administration has been greatly weakened. The risk of this attitude change is that if the U.S. really withdraws from the Ukraine issue or reduce the intensity, it will be difficult for Europe to bear the pressure of Russia alone. It will not be easy. If the European Union and the major NATO countries can't keep up and the Russia-Ukraine conflict fails to end soon, then the security landscape in Eastern Europe will become more complex. It may fall into a long and even a war of attrition that will drag down the European economy. The problem now is that, judging from the information disclosed by the media, the Trump administration of the United States, including Vice President Mike Pence, is very hostile to Europe. Most European countries' attitude towards the current U.S. government have a very negative, critical attitude. It can be said that the U.S.-European relationship is at a low point and deadlock. Whether the Atlantic Partnership Alliance, whether it still exists, are all in doubt. These are all huge problems. This may lead to, once European allies are really tied up with energy and resources, coupled with the deterioration of U.S.-European relations, then in the Indo-Pacific region may face the situation of fighting China alone. A fence needs 3 stakes. A hero needs 3 helpers. How confident is the United States that it can get the cooperation of its allies? Without the assistance of allies, what are its chances of winning? This is a realistic contradiction, and it will also be a dilemma in diplomacy. Then we will see that the U.S. proposed that preventing armed aggression against Taiwan is as important as the defense of the U.S. mainland, are both the top priorities. For the U.S., the Taiwan issue has always been a core part of Indo-Pacific security. Which is a core part. This document from the U.S. Department of Defense the defense of Taiwan as equal to the defense of the U.S. mainland. This should be an unprecedented high-profile statement by the United States. The U.S. government knows that once a cross-strait war starts, and once Taiwan is controlled by the mainland, the U.S. Navy's forward deployment in the first island chain will be severely damaged. The question of whether to exercise dominance in the Western Pacific in this context, whether it is Biden administration's vague commitment or the Trump administration's high-profile shift, reflects the US's growing tendency is increasingly inclined to clarity. It is no longer as ambiguous. It means that if the mainland uses force, the US will definitely help. Of course, this does not mean the US will immediately confront the mainland head-on and go to war. The so-called clarification is more about deterrence. It hopes to use a clear military intervention stance to discourage the mainland from sending troops. However, this threat strategy itself carries a very high degree of danger. If the Chinese mainland judges that the US's attitude is just bluffing, Trump is a coward and dare not fight, or think you've already done it, prepared for a direct confrontation with the US military, then the possibility of conflict breaking out in the Taiwan Strait will rise rapidly. At present, the worst-case scenario is emerging. The accelerated escalation of China-U.S. confrontation, the consequences and prospects are also very complex. I think the first point is the issue of regional allies' alignment. The U.S. military's focus on the Indo-Pacific will force allies in regions such as Japan, South Korea, and Australia further consolidate the front against China. The Taiwan issue will be pushed to the forefront. If the US takes actions to protect Taiwan, or a tough stance, it will necessarily provide support and even cooperation, whether in politics, military, economy, or diplomacy, or require the cooperation of allies. The Afghanistan war is inseparable from the cooperation of allies. This will stimulate China-U.S. diplomatic and military will be highly intensified. The new U.S. administration has been asking Japan to increase its military budget. The Japanese government has a tough attitude and is extremely reluctant, but they are afraid that they have to do it. It must be done. It's a must. In the past 80 years, Japan has a lot of debt in terms of national defense. Japan, maybe more than any other country, needs to modernize its military as soon as possible, and the goal of building a strong military, because its security situation has deteriorated sharply. But we can clearly see that the Japanese government discontent with some policies of the new U.S. government, and even disgust. These are directly reflected in the Japanese government's public statement against U.S. coercion. The Japanese government's attitude is very clear. The defense budget will be increased by myself, but not because of your coercion. The second aspect is the issue of economic decoupling and technological confrontation. The escalation of military confrontation, it will inevitably strengthen the technological and economic wars. From chip control to financial system decoupling will be further extended. As the US justifies national security, continuously expand the export ban on China, China will also strengthen the substitution of the dependence on the US. It is foreseeable that the US has imposed chip sanctions on China will be further strengthened. The comprehensive competition between the two economies will further tear the global industrial chain apart. This will not only have a profound impact on both countries, but also have a serious impact on the world economy. Thirdly, it's about the reshaping of the global order. When the US focuses on the Indo-Pacific, it not only means that Europe may lose the US or the absolute support of a call to action, but also means the global security strategy pattern will undergo profound changes. If there is a large-scale conflict in the Indo-Pacific, the international order will present a more serious instability than the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. It may also force more neutral countries to accelerate choosing sides, or even trigger new global military alliances or economic camps. For these situations, my personal opinion is that from a series of actions of the Trump administration, we can see that the U.S.'s strategic positioning towards China is becoming increasingly clear and tough. China as the number one challenger to America's global hegemony in this context, sacrificing Ukraine and ease pressure on Russia. This is a temporary solution for the U.S. Let European countries bear the defense of Russia to save American resources to confront China in the Pacific region. The attitude towards the Taiwan issue is becoming clearer and tougher. It reflects that the U.S.'s main direction has become very clear. Preventing the Chinese mainland from unifying Taiwan by force has become Washington's primary goal. However, such approach is actually highly dangerous. The Taiwan issue is a core interest for the Chinese mainland, but a strategic pivot for the U.S. If both sides move closer, and even cross the red line, then both sides' patience and room for gain will be squeezed without a way out. The chance of accidental firing will increase sharply. Then once a military conflict breaks out between China and the United States in the Taiwan Strait, its consequences will not be limited to the Taiwan Strait, but may evolve into a global military crisis, economic chaos, and even trigger a crisis on the scale of World War III. In the past few decades, the China-U.S. relationship has experienced several frictions. It has maintained a certain balance and cooperation framework, the so-called fighting without breaking. Now, with the changes in the domestic and foreign environment of the U.S., Trump and his staff have continuously intensified their hostility and used the label of the only pace threat to strengthen domestic consensus. The confrontation between China and the U.S. is indeed accelerating. If all parties fail to find a way to seek a manageable crisis and effective mechanisms, so the risk of future conflict is certainly going to get higher. In short, the U.S. is shifting its focus from Europe to Indo-Pacific. Actually reveals a dangerous signal. He would rather let the conflict in Ukraine drag on in Europe, but also to showdown with China in Asia. This is essential for world security, economic stability, and international order is not a good sign. For China, also needs to take precautions. The Taiwan Strait issue is the core of China's sovereignty and unity, but also the most sensitive and dangerous area in the China-U.S. game. A little careless, it may lead to unexpected conflicts and disasters. Finally, I want to say that the Sino-U.S. confrontation has reached this point, whether it's geopolitics or domestic politics, have all been fueling the conflict. The Trump administration's abandonment of Ukraine and fully protecting Taiwan has undoubtedly made the situation in the Taiwan Strait more tense. Behind the called first priority is the comprehensive containment of the United States in the Asia-Pacific region. China's strategic thoughts have implications for both sides and the world. It means a deeper division and huge risks of conflict. It can be said that a new international game has begun, and the future direction it will largely depend on how China and the United States manage Taiwan Strait risks will be determined. After all, if this most sensitive string were to break, the result will only be a full-scale shock. What both sides need is rational cooling and diplomatic negotiation rather than a headlong charge in a tense situation, ultimately leading to an irreversible hot war disaster. Okay, friends, our program today is over here. Welcome friends to help like, follow, and join membership. Your support is very important to me. It's very important to our channel, this little sound. It can make everyone interact more. This YouTube algorithm that was able to make my show recommend this column more. Thank you for your support. See you at the same time tomorrow.